This week on Accelerate Slate, an Enrollment Fuel podcast, Katie and I will talk about how you can get the most out of your deliver messages and think through some things that are going to make your life a little bit easier when it comes to cycle prep for your communication flows. Hello, you are here at Accelerate Slate with Susanna Lehman Mayo and
Katie Jordan.
And today we are going to talk a little bit about some pro tips on deliver. So, Katie, why did we choose this topic?
Well, we wanted to do something fun. And again, I think I've even said this on the podcast. I am so bad about the word fun. So Susanna and I were spitballing topics and we landed on deliver. That'll be fun.
It is. I mean, I think what's cool about deliver is there's so many amazing things you can do. The biggest challenge is I think people get overwhelmed by the amount of options that are available to them. So we
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. So we wanted to just kind of highlight a couple things that are pretty easy for you to implement, but also make your life so much easier. So, so Katie, let's first start with one of my favorite tips that I learned from you, which is you just mentioned it right before we started recording. So why don't you take it away?
Did I say it was fun?
I think you might have mentioned that it's
You
fun.
know? Okay, yeah. So there's a couple things that like clients have asked me where they're like, hey, we just think this should exist. And I have been like, you know what? It really should. When I was on the college side, that would have made my life better. Why doesn't it exist? And then I take the time to dig through the knowledge base. And I know another thing we say all the time is like, you don't know what you don't know. And it can be really hard to find something if you don't know what it's called.
Correct. Yes.
Right. So all of this is leading to honestly one of my very, very favorite things in Slate that exists with deliver messages. Um, and it is on everyone's favorite part, building the recipient list. So
Very, very true.
I know. So if you click on edit recipient list on a deliver message, you have the standard two options of new query, and then you have upload spreadsheet. And one day a client asked me, Katie, I feel like we are always messaging, similar groups of students. We want to invite people to open houses, to tours. We want to let people like in a vicinity know that our application is opening, just similar inquiry application populations. Why do we always have to build it as a new query? And I was like, you could copy it. Um,
Always an
anyway,
option. Always an option.
that led me down a little bit of a rabbit hole into knowledge base. And I learned about the third option, which is to make an import query button show.
And that's so cool. I love when I see that.
Oh, cool. It's now one of the things that I audit in a client's instance to check on it, make sure they're using it as a tool. But the idea is that leaving the deliver tool for a second, if you jump over to queries with any query at all, if you are either building from scratch or you want this to work with an existing query, no problem at all. All you need to do is have that query exist in a folder labeled deliver, capital D, subfolder templates, capital T. If you have that query with the share permissions on in that folder and in that subfolder, it will magically appear as an option for you under import query. It's available to everyone in your system who has access to deliver. But it is an incredible tool to really streamline the query building, particularly for offices where maybe the person who is writing the messages is not the same person as the person who's doing the query side of it. It can really, really help with that. So I think that's my best deliver tip. I love that one.
I also love that one. And kind of going along with building out those queries, I'm a big fan of using populations for those queries. So that way they can continue to run. So when you update your populations during cycle prep, which we talked about during one of our recent podcasts, you can just keep the same mailings going and just use those populations to help. And one of the other things I love to do that can just make your queries and make your, I should say, make your deliver messages last a little bit longer is use translation codes. So how do you do that, you might ask, and what's the goal of that? So one of my favorite options is if you have a deadline in your message. So let's say you've got a message that you want to keep going out that pushes the application and you want people to apply by, maybe at first it's October 15th, then you move it to November 15th, and then December 1st. Well, if you export the current date, then you can translate that to say if the current date is before October 14th, you push the October 15th date. So when you choose your translation codes, you'll just put in the date range that you want the certain export to show, and then you'll put in what export you want. So again, that's where you'd say if it's before October 15th, then you're going to show October, or I should say if it's before October 14th, then you're going to push the October 15th deadline, and then so on. So you can put in those specific date ranges, and that means that your application push, your deposit push messaging can all have dates that are relevant, and you don't have to turn off and turn on and turn off and turn on your messages. Now, of course,
you say it that way.
right? Well, and the nice thing is that same concept can work in your portals. So if you have the deadline listed in your portal, you can use that same idea of the translation codes to push out a specific date for your deadlines. So makes your life a lot easier and a little bit cleaner.
Well, you're also really the one who pushed me more towards using like things like active period filters and using round keys. Rather, yeah. So I think a lot of your work is geared not towards set it and forget it, but just working more efficiently.
That's my goal, right? I want people to not have to just turn off, turn on messages all the time. Also, I hate stopping a mailing and then starting it again. There's a lot of that typing that I have to do, and I just don't enjoy doing it. But
No
one
one
of
ever wanted to maximize the number of times they have to hit the like deliver large mailing. It's stressful.
Oh, it is. It is. Well, and speaking of things that you don't want to have to turn off and on again, signatures. So, I've been in instances before where they had messages all coming from the director of admission or VP of enrollment or somebody who's in a specific role. Well, that's great if that person's in that role for 20 years. If that position changes and you've got somebody new who's in charge, there are ways that you can set up your mailings to be a little bit smarter. So, Katie, I know I've seen you do this before. So, why don't you talk a little bit about your trick here?
Yeah, oh my gosh. So, very similar situation. I was doing a lot of communications for a school where, in fairly short order, Susanna, I don't know if I told you this, probably one of my bigger time wastes. Um, but first we lost our VP to another institution. Sorry, they're fine. They're doing great.
Yeah.
So first, our VP left for another institution, and I stopped all of our messages and I put in our director's signature. And then our director left for a new institution.
Ouch.
Right. I was mad for a couple reasons, up to and including, please stop making me update every single message in our system. But the great news is following this second one, wish it was following the first one, or wish that, I don't know, it was in the first place. But the other next best option is then I learned about snippets and how to use them with signatures.
Wait, are you talking snippets or content blocks?
That's fair. So I like a personal snippet for my signature, but you are completely correct that I would rather a content block for my current use case. So, Susanna, maybe next time I'll learn it.
Hey, you know what? Here's the thing. For those of you who are newer to Slate, you're probably not familiar with why snippets and content blocks are it's a language change. So we'll just
be nice to me. It's okay.
Yeah, we'll just say that it used to be that content blocks were called snippets, and even when you are putting a content block into a message, you still type the word snippet. So it is hard to relearn that language. Snippets
I
actually live under texting and inbox, and content blocks live under deliver. So for those of you who are keeping up with us, they're slightly different, although they're also very similar.
Well, Slate is its own language. I mean, so given that I exclusively use Suitcase, will I say briefcase 80% of the time?
Right? It I don't know. At least I find Slate language easier to keep up with than like current slang for high schoolers. I mean,
I've given up.
right. Spending time with my niece a couple weeks ago, I was real confused when she said, "Oh, I don't ship them," which apparently means does
Oh
not like
no.
a friend's relationship. Who knew? Anyway,
Oh,
we're
I thought it was like
digressing.
you don't, yeah, like you don't like two people together. Like you don't relationship them.
Yeah. Who knew? Who knew? But
I'm very youthful.
yeah, not Slate language. Maybe Slate will come up with some kind of ship thing in the future. But just know
Anyway,
Slate language does change too. And it's okay if you're if you're stuck on some of the old language, that's still okay.
so content blocks.
Yes, back to
Anyway.
content blocks.
So yeah, so I've built them into messages for my own former instance, as well as client instances, largely related to turnover, though they do have an absolute ton of uses. So under deliver, it is one of your right hand navigation options if you are clicking long for whatever reason, feeling really good today. Um, New key, I name it signature. And then you can put them in based on the username values as well as have a default one. So if there is not staff assigned, it'll still have something populate. But you can also have a separate one for director to really just have that as a little static thing. The really wonderful thing about content blocks is that it is editable independent of the message. So if you are using content blocks and you have the director one at the bottom of however many messages, you do not need to, first off, do it multiple times. You do not need to start and stop anything. It is just go into the one and update it there. So it's incredible for staff turnover, all different sorts, all different levels. We've been saying mostly, at the VP level, at the director level, but I love a personalized territory manager stream as well. So that's my other big one.
I would agree with you, Katie. And I do kind of a similar thing where I've got my signatures that are based on the username, and then I've got signatures that are based on the roles. And, I always want to make sure that it's easy for staff members to update in the future. But I also want to make sure that it's clean and clear and consistent. And also, when I'm doing communication flows, I want messages to be able to come from different people, and I'm air quoting different people. If I want to have a director of financial aid message that goes out to students or something from student accounts or wherever, I know that by building out content blocks that are specific to those roles, I can just hard code in the email itself rather than using a merge field for the position. I can put in there director of admission, pull that content block for director of admission, director of financial aid, same thing. So it's an easy trick and makes your life so much simpler when there is staff turnover. And let's face it, staff turnover is the name of the game right now.
Well, I've also one really cool way I used them once was I wrote one for every single major the school had available. It was time consuming, but it also meant that then I had those available throughout the entire instance rather than
Mhm.
one message with a truly unacceptable amount of liquid markup.
I would agree with you, Katie. And I would say what I love to do with that, this isn't necessarily in deliver, but if you've got a daily visit and say the students want to meet with a faculty member, if you use that same concept of building translation codes for each major, then you could automatically, from your form communication, fire off an email using that translation code to the appropriate faculty member when a student registers and say, can you meet with this student at this time? And spoiler alert, you could even create translation codes for the time if you wanted to say that if it's at 9, you ask the faculty if they're available between 9 and noon or whatever your window is. So,
Yep.
it's just
I
smart
like it.
things that make your
Yep.
life a little easier.
Man, too smart for me.
Oh, that was something I tried. I didn't think about the time thing when I did it at my previous school, but
Okay.
I did say the students visiting at this time, let us know if you're available within the next 2 hours of this time. But you could be smarter and put a translation code out there. What you'd want to do, obviously, is work on your export a little bit. So even with the dates that we talked about earlier, so that it makes it a little bit more evergreen, you could export just parts of the date so that way you don't get the whole timestamp or everything else to make the translation just a little cleaner.
Oh, I like it. Great.
Right? These are all things I like. One of the other things that comes to my mind when I think about deliver and kind of best practices is on your campus, oftentimes your staff gets really tired of your templates. That used to drive me crazy. And here's why. Um, your templates are essentially your brand. And so if you are sending out any kind of marketing message, you want it to be very obvious from the moment the student opens your email that it is from your institution. So as you think about wanting new templates, you really want to think about why you want new templates. Is it because you're tired of seeing the same templates, or is it because the students are? If you think about any other messages you get from any store, so let's say DSW, because goodness knows I get 3
That's
emails a day from TSW and Tom's. Clearly have a shoe problem. But all their messages look the same generally. Now, there may be some different blocks in there and those types of things. But the truth is, even within Slate messaging, I prefer a one column format for your emails because you have to think about how students are opening your messages, and it is primarily on their phones if they're even opening your messages. So the one column does work really well for that. Now, of course, we are used to looking at our messages on computers, so you see the multiple columns and all of that, but you should remember that students are really seeing that one column. So when you're thinking about your templates, I do recommend, if you've got somebody in your marketing team who's good at the design type of thing, ask them to create a series of headers for you. Clearly label those so you can get them cleanly into your library and get your library organized. Best practice for that is start organizing it before you put anything in it, because unfortunately, once your message is out, it is linked back to that image URL. So changing the name, folder, or whatever will break the link right now. So just know that as you're doing your images. But you could ask your marketing team to come up with some templates for you, incorporate some that have a button, some that don't, leave space for your content block, have them help you design your content block. So that way you can make sure that all the formatting works the way it needs to on mobile, tablets, and whatever email servers are out there. Also, always know that Outlook is probably going to look way worse than everything else. So
But here's the
fun
thing.
fact.
Are the students sitting down to look at it on their Outlook on their desktops?
And that's the thing to remember. Most people are getting their emails on a phone and also through like Gmail or another server like that.
I'm
So
not
you want to make
saying
sure you're testing
don't
on
yeah.
those.
Not saying don't plan for an Outlook message, but are they just gonna look at it on their phones? If oh, I don't want to say if at all, but
Yes. The answer is yes.
terrible note to include in this.
That's it, but it is true, and I think we all have to
Nature of the
remember
beast.
that.
Yeah.
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 So, so have your marketing
Mhm.
develop those templates, have them work on some images for you, get those cleaned up, make sure they are formatted to the right width for your templates. And then, as you may or may not know, Katie and I did a fabulous presentation last fall on Deliver Designer, which is another option for creating templates. So when your staff does get kind of tired of seeing everything look exactly the same, you could give them options to show your logo on a different color,
Yeah.
or put your buttons in a different color, or move your buttons. So I shouldn't say move your buttons, but really change the hyperlinks on your buttons. So there's some easy ways that you can kind of incorporate ways to change the template without changing the template. One of my favorite options is really thinking about your social. So if you've got grad and undergrad in the same instance, it doesn't require you to have 6 templates for each of your different areas, but instead a Deliver Designer template that hyperlinks to the correct social depending on the programs that you're recruiting for. So just something to be thinking about as you are developing your templates, developing your image library, or cleaning up, if that may be the case for you. And I'm sure if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably in the cleaning up stage.
Well, and there's also, I maybe shouldn't say anything because I haven't played with it myself too much. But up until like, I don't know, a month or so ago, if you started a message within a template, you typed out your content and you thought, I'm not sure I like this template anymore. Maybe this isn't the best fit. And you tried to change your template in the message.
And you lost all your content. Yep.
Right. Happened once or twice. There is like the new option. Have you seen it?
No.
Oh my gosh. I think I do a little bit more to deliver messages these days. However, there is a new option. If you go into edit message, and you go to pick a different template, there's now a checkbox that says replace actual content.
Love that. Okay, huge win. Yay. Thank you, Technolutions. That is a huge win.
Mhm. Because that definitely happened to me. So I'm very excited to say that that's a thing of the past.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So one of the other things that I think is important when you're thinking about your messaging and deliver is actually reporting on it. What I often do is, first of all, make sure that my query, or my, I should say, sorry, one of the things that I like to do is make sure that my deliver messages are in clear folders. So then when I go to pull a report on the information, I can just look for that deliver folder, look for the messages that have been sent or are actively running, and then pull the data and the statistics that go along with it. So that is another thing just to be thinking about, is making sure your folders are clear. And one of the things that I think happens frequently is, especially when you're new to Slate, you don't really understand why foldering is so important. So you're like, okay, staff, if you want to write messages and put them in deliver, great, go ahead and make your own folder. Well, then you get this ginormous list of folders, and then a staff turnover happens. It just becomes really messy. So a lot of times what I do is, if I want to have a folder for them, because it is helpful to keep those things broken out, I will do staff deliver messages and then put the content, or have them build subfolders under that folder.
I like that. I like that a lot. I mean, it makes the documentation easier, but I mean, we even were talking earlier about how a lot of messages are similar year over year. And if you have the clear foldering structure and you're looking to invite a new batch of students to a similar event, being able to find your past language and not reinvent a wheel, big fan.
Yep, absolutely. Well, and one other thing I want to make sure we touch on. I mean, there's so much we could talk about and deliver, but we don't want this podcast to go an hour today. Um, but one of the other things that I think is really underutilized is the A/B testing. And the A/B testing isn't necessarily even about the content of the message in all cases. Sometimes it's just about checking to see which headers are getting your messages opened and clicked. So I don't know, Katie, do you want to say a little bit more about that?
I love A/B testing. So yeah, I mean, I think it first came up with you and I, like sharing a client hours. And we both had different ideas for what the subject header should be. And I wouldn't say it was an argument, but I would say that we did not agree. So we
Yeah,
were arguing.
that's fair. Healthy debate. It was a healthy debate, Katie.
Um, and we landed on, all right, let's find out. So this is one of those things in Slate that's like very small and I think can be overlooked. But if you are in edit message next to the subject line, there's going to be a little drop down box that says like version A, version B, version 1, version 2, version something.
Yes.
Um, and it defaults to 1 or A, who's to say. Um, and the idea is that that's your starting ground. But if you click on it, you can drop down and change it, and it gives you a completely blank message. So, as Susanna said, you can have identical content in 2 different headers. If you're messing around with Deliver Designer, it's easy enough to change some components. Awesome. Um, But you are then given some new sending options under send mailing. And it lets you do things like say, okay, let's just send 100 as a sample message for an hour. And then after the hour or whatever time amount, um, send out to everybody else, whichever version got more opens, got more clicks, got more engagement. So you can do like a little trial period to see which of your changes is more impactful for students. If you're dabbling with pre-headers,
Right, right. And
it's
pre-headers should be in your messages. So just make sure you're using pre-headers if you're not. But go ahead, Katie.
or compare A and B and see if the pre-header.
It's
And
true.
this is how we get to there.
Right. Well, and it'll help you again when you go back to look at your analysis and see, okay, well, this message opened better. Let's look at the subject line and see why we think that might have happened. There's definitely some tips out there that I've read in the past and they're always evolving, but things like use the preferred name in your subject line or say I there to make it feel like it's more personal or put emojis in there. So some different things that you can do to kind of clean that up, which does take me to one other thing. Sorry, I said that was the last thing and I lied. One other thing that I think is smart is I mentioned this before, but it's mixing up who your messages are coming from. And there is no issue with sending messages from your counselor, again, air quotes there, that don't have the branding on them. So you can include the signature without an image and just keep it really simple. So it looks like it's coming from your email server rather than from Slate or through Slate. So that's just another thing to be thinking about is, sometimes the student is going to be more likely to open it if it feels like it's not a marketing message. And that's where having it come from your counselor non-branded makes a lot of sense. And of course, if you have the same type of message that's going out fairly regularly to students, from all counselors, why not make it one message where you're merging in the staff assigned name, email, and their signature? So just another thing to be thinking about. You just want to mix up your marketing a little bit and mix up your messaging so that some stuff feels branded and is branded, but some of those messages that really are a little bit more transactional look and feel like they are really transactional rather than totally branded.
I mean, as a Kathleen, whenever I get an email addressed to Kathleen, I know for a fact that that is not a company, a school, and anything that I gave my information to. I am not a first name person. Decision letters, you want to be formal, like we can talk. But I don't open things that go to my first name because I don't use it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And I keep lying because I just thought of one other thing that I want to make sure we mention today. I know, sorry, Katie. You're like, we're wrapping up, and sorry, listeners, we're not
Hey,
wrapping up yet. One more thing I want to make sure that we mention out loud here. If you are messaging parents, do not copy the parents on the message to the student. You can personalize your parent messages the same way you can student messages. Use the relation base. I always say this, and I'll say it again here. The relation base is the reason I started using configurable joins. I wanted to be able to very clearly identify who are my current accepts versus current deposits so that I could send the right message to the right population. And it was just so much easier to double check my data and make sure things are working the way they're supposed to. And like anything with queries, when you're choosing the relation base, you are getting one row per parent, guardian, whoever it is that you're messaging, which means that you can personalize that and say, hi, Katie, your student, Susanna, is accepted to enrollmentFUEL school. Here's your next steps, or here's your student's next steps. So use that relation base and use it all the time.
It is a really, really great knowledge base article. It's one of the top ones that I have. Messaging relationship records. If you are comfortable with joins, it's no problem. If you are uncomfortable with joins, it is also no problem. It is a great article.
Yeah. So use the knowledge base and just think about some of these tips as you're building out your deliver messages for the next cycle or as you're updating during your cycle prep this summer. So if you have questions for us, as always, we are available and you can find our information where you found this podcast. And we look forward to chatting with you next time. Thanks for listening.
Bye.